Welcome to Relative Our Family Mess. This is a dedicated space where we explore the deeper dimensions of life, focusing on true strength, timeless resilience, and the compelling stories that shape a man's journey. If you appreciate substantive, impactful content and refined perspectives, you are in the right place. Without further ado, I welcome you to today's new video. I was holding a blueprint when I understood that my wife had been a stranger, not unknown. Known incompletely, the way a river is known by its surface and never by the weight it carries along the bottom. I was standing in a cabin I had never seen before, holding engineering drawings covered in her handwriting, and the structure on the page was one I recognized immediately, because the bridge it described had collapsed in 2011 and killed 6 people. But that came later. 5 days and 500 miles north of the kitchen where it began, the morning after we buried Catherine. I stood in the doorway of our kitchen on 34th Avenue in Minneapolis and realized I did not know what to do with my hands. For 41 years, those hands had held pencils against drafting tables and turned the pages of structural reports with the confidence of a man who understood load distribution the way a musician understands pitch. Catherine used to say my hands thought faster than my head. She said it with a stillness behind the words that made you trust them. The kitchen smelled like other people's grief. Casserole dishes covered the counter from the coffee maker to the sink, each labeled in masking tape. Mary Ann's wild rice hot dish, the Petersons' ham and scalloped potatoes. Blue dish goes back to First Lutheran. The handwriting belonged to women from our church who had loved Catherine quietly and practically, in the Minnesota way. Which is to say, with food, and without unnecessary conversation. Catherine had known what to do in a kitchen, in a garden, in a conversation, in the long silences of a winter evening when the snow came down and the house settled into itself like a held breath. She had been a woman of tremendous stillness, not the stillness of someone with nothing to say. The stillness of deep water, the kind you look at and believe you understand, because the surface is calm, and you never think to ask what is moving underneath. I cleared the counter because it was the only task that required no decisions. Dish by dish, I moved everything to the refrigerator until there was no more room. Then I stood at the sink, running water hot enough to steam the window. The backyard blurred. Through the fog, I could see the birch tree Catherine had planted the spring we moved in, its bark white against the October gray. No one had told it anything had changed. I thought about Andrew. He had left the morning after the funeral, appearing at my bedroom door at 7 with his coat buttoned and his keys in hand. Emergency at the office. A contract timeline that could not slip. He kissed my forehead, which he had not done since he was 12, and was gone before the coffee finished brewing. What stayed with me was not the leaving. Andrew ran a company that built bridges and overpasses and the infrastructure that holds a city's weight. CEOs leave. That is what they do. What stayed was the moment at the graveside. He had stood beside the casket with his hands folded, very still. Not the stillness of grief. I have stood beside enough grieving families to know what sorrow looks like in the body. Andrew's stillness was different. It was the stillness of a man waiting for a conclusion. And once, just once, his eyes moved to Catherine's left hand, resting against the white satin lining, to the thin gold band she had worn for 46 years. He looked at that ring for 3 seconds, with an expression I could not name and did not want to examine. I hung the towel on the hook where Catherine always kept it. The house was quiet in the specific way houses become quiet when the person who made them homes is gone. The furnace clicked. The refrigerator hummed. The birch tree tapped one branch against the upstairs window in a rhythm that sounded like someone knocking to be let back in. On the kitchen table sat a small notebook, pale green cover, spiral bound, corners softened from years in a purse. I opened it. Every page was blank, not torn, not scratched through. Empty all the way to the back, as though she had bought it for something she never began, or for something she had already finished somewhere else. Catherine had spent every September evening on the back porch, her chair angled north, chin lifted as though listening for something beyond the tree line. I asked her once what she was looking at. "Just remembering," she said. I assumed she meant Duluth, her childhood on the Iron Range, the weight of a Minnesota autumn, which arrives not with drama but with patience, the way deep water cools from the bottom up. I never asked which memory. 46 years, and I had read her silences as contentment. Standing in that kitchen, I was no longer certain that was what they were. My phone rang at 8:47, a Minnesota area code I did not recognize. Not Minneapolis. Not Duluth. Somewhere further north. Somewhere I had no reason to know. I almost let it go. Something made me answer. "Is this Thomas Whitfield?" A woman's voice. Professional, measured, with a careful warmth around the edges that told me she had been preparing for this call. "It is. My name is Eleanor Voss. I'm an attorney based in Ely, Minnesota. I apologize for the timing, Mr. Whitfield, but your wife retained me 11 years ago with very specific instructions, and given the circumstances, I felt I could not wait. I pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down. The casserole dishes were behind me. The blank notebook was on the table. Outside, the birch tree stood white and still against the morning. I was not aware Catherine had separate legal representation. I said that was her intention. No apology in Eleanor's tone, only the steady voice of someone setting down something she had carried for a long time. "She left you a property, Mr. Whitfield, a cabin on Lake Keswick, north of the Boundary Waters. It has been in her family for 2 generations. Under the terms of her will, it passes to you directly and exclusively." "I have never heard of Lake Keswick," I said. "I know." Catherine anticipated that. A pause. She left specific instructions. I am going to read them exactly as she wrote them. I told her I was ready. I was not. Eleanor's voice shifted. Less attorney. More messenger. "James, if you are hearing this, I am already gone, and I was not able to tell you in person what I should have said years ago. I am sorry for that more than I can put down on paper. Go to the cabin on Lake Keswick. Go alone. Do not tell Andrew. When you get there, open the compartment under the floorboards on the east side. Trust me one last time. The kitchen went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The furnace stopped. The refrigerator paused between cycles. Even the birch tree held still. We spoke for another 8 minutes. An address she would text. A key waiting with a caretaker. Paperwork she could handle remotely. I wrote none of it down because every word had already pressed itself into the part of the mind that holds what you cannot afford to lose. When I hung up, I sat without moving for a long time. Do not tell Andrew. Open the floorboards on the east side. 46 years of shared dinners and shared beds and shared silences that I had believed meant everything. My wife had kept an attorney in northern Minnesota for 11 of those years, without saying a word. I reached for the suit jacket draped over the back of the chair since the funeral. My hand went into the breast pocket by habit, checking the way hands do. My fingers found an envelope. Small. Sealed. My name on the front in Catherine's handwriting, but not the steady script I knew from grocery lists and birthday cards. This was compressed, pressed hard into the paper. The letters written by someone with very little time and a great deal left to say. I turned it over. The seal was intact. The pen strokes were uneven in a way Catherine's handwriting never was, as though her hand had been trembling. I opened it, standing at the counter with the morning light falling across the page. James, I am sorry I kept this from you. I kept it because I know you. You would have gone straight to Andrew and asked him directly. You have always done that. Walked toward the problem with both hands open. I love that about you. It terrifies me right now. The cabin on Lake Keswick. Under the floorboards, east side. Do not tell Andrew. Not yet. Trust me one last time. I read it twice. Then I set it flat on the table and pressed my hand over it, as though I could feel her pulse through the paper. She had known me precisely enough to predict the thing I would do, and to build her entire plan around preventing it. I was still sitting there when my phone rang again. I looked at the screen. Andrew. Dad. How are you holding up? Getting through it. I said, good. That is good. A pause. The particular silence of a man choosing his next sentence with care. Listen. I heard you got a call this morning from some attorney up north. Something about Mom's papers. I stood very still at the kitchen table. Catherine's letter was under my hand. Her instructions were in my ear. And my son, who lived in Minneapolis and had left my house 14 hours ago claiming an emergency at work, somehow already knew about a phone call from a lawyer in Ely, Minnesota. How do you know about Eleanor Voss? I asked. Mom mentioned her once. A long time ago. I just want to make sure you are not getting buried in paperwork on top of everything else. If there is property to deal with, I can drive up and handle it. You should not have to manage that right now. His voice was careful, helpful, warm in exactly the right places. And something about its warmth made the hair on the back of my neck rise the way it used to rise on a job site when a load-bearing measurement came back almost normal. I will let you know, I said. Thank you. Andrew. I hung up before he could say anything else. I stood at a kitchen window after hanging up and looked at the birch tree for a long time. Andrew's voice was still in my ear. Warm, measured, helpful in exactly the proportions a grieving father would need, and familiar in a way that had nothing to do with him being my son. It was the same voice Dr. Reinhardt had used. The memory arrived without invitation. 2 years earlier, Andrew had sat in this same kitchen and told me he was concerned about Catherine. She had been repeating things, he said, forgetting names, small moments he had noticed during family dinners, a story told twice in the same evening, a pause that lasted a beat too long before she found the words she wanted. I want to get her evaluated. Dad, just to be safe. There is a specialist, Dr. Reinhardt, neurology, very well regarded. He had placed his hand on my forearm when he said it. The gesture of a son carrying a weight he did not want his father to carry alone. I had looked at his face and seen what I expected to see. The open, steady expression of a man who loved his mother and was afraid for her. Catherine had been in the next room. I remembered that now. She had come to the kitchen doorway while Andrew was speaking and stood there for a moment, and I had glanced up and met her eyes. She had not spoken. She had looked at me, then at Andrew, then back at me. And the expression on her face was something I had filed away without examining, because it did not fit the version of the moment I was building. I had agreed to the evaluation. Dr. Reinhardt had been thorough, professional, and reassuring in the particular way that makes you stop asking questions. Early-stage cognitive decline, manageable with monitoring, no cause for alarm, but prudent to begin a care plan. Andrew had handled the scheduling. Andrew had driven her to the appointments. Andrew had spoken with the doctor privately afterward, while I waited in the hallway. I had called it love. I had told myself it was my son looking after his mother because he understood medicine better than I did, which was true, since I understood concrete and steel and the mathematics of tension, not the chemistry of the brain. So I stepped aside. I let Andrew manage it. Catherine had not argued. She had simply gone quiet in a way I had mistaken for acceptance. Standing at the window now, I was no longer certain it had been acceptance. The other memory was older and further away, but it came with the same strange clarity. Thanksgiving, 2008. Our dining room, Catherine's cranberry sauce, Andrew's wine, the good plates she brought out once a year. After dessert, Andrew had reached into his briefcase and produced a document. 2 pages, professional binding, a signature line at the bottom. I need a small favor. Dad, it is a peer review formality for a project filing. Standard procedure. But they want an independent engineer's signature. Just a family courtesy. Really. He had smiled. The easy smile. The one that made clients lean in and trust him with their money and their timelines and their futures. I had taken the pen he offered and signed at the kitchen table between the dessert plates and the half-empty wine glasses. Because he was my son. And sons do not hand their fathers documents that require careful reading. And fathers do not ask their sons to explain what should not need explaining. Catherine had been sitting across from me. Her teacup was raised halfway to her lips. When I signed, her hand paused. Not a flinch. Not a reaction anyone else in the room would have noticed. Just a pause. A fraction of a second longer than the natural rhythm of drinking tea. As though something inside her had shifted weight from one foot to the other. She set the cup down and said nothing. I had not thought about that pause in 16 years. Standing in my kitchen with her letter on the table and her instructions in my head, and my son's voice fading from the phone. I thought about it now. 2 memories. A document I signed without reading. A doctor I accepted without questioning. Both offered to me by the same man in the same patient. Helpful voice. And in both moments, Catherine had been watching. And in both moments, she had said nothing. She had not said nothing because she had nothing to say. She had said nothing because she was building something that required silence to survive. I went upstairs. I pulled the travel bag from the closet and began to pack. I did not pack much. 2 changes of clothes, a flashlight, the thermos Catherine had given me 3 Christmases ago. Dark green with a dented lid. The kind of gift that says, I know exactly who you are. I set the alarm for 4:30 and lay down on my side of the bed in the dark. Catherine's side was still made, the pillow still dented where her head had rested. I did not touch it. I did not sleep. At 5:15 I carried the bag downstairs, poured coffee into the thermos, and pulled out of the driveway before the streetlights surrendered to the morning. For the first time in 46 years, I was keeping a secret from my son. It did not feel like deception. It felt like waking up. The first 2 hours belonged to the highway. I-35 North runs straight out of Minneapolis, through suburbs that thin into farmland and then into forest. And that morning, I was grateful for the monotony. The road asked nothing of me. The thermos sat in the cup holder, still warm, and the coffee tasted the way Catherine's coffee always tasted. Strong, a little bitter, made by someone who understood that comfort is not the same as sweetness. Past Duluth, the landscape changed. The interstate gave way to 2-lane roads that wound through birch and pine and the occasional stretch of open water. This was Catherine's country. She had grown up on the Iron Range, daughter of a mining surveyor, a woman who understood the composition of the ground beneath her feet before she understood much else about the world. She had told me once about the lakes up here. We were on the back porch. September. The light going copper through the trees. She had her tea. I had my coffee. We were not speaking, which was its own kind of conversation after 40 years. The lakes up here do not move. James. Not on the surface. You can look at them all day and believe nothing is happening. But everything happens underneath. The temperature shifts. The oxygen layers rearrange. The water at the bottom is a different world from the water at the top. And the surface never tells you which one you are looking at. I had taken it as poetry. Catherine had a lyrical streak that surfaced in the evenings, a tendency to see metaphor in the physical world that I, a man who had spent his life measuring things that could be measured, found beautiful without fully understanding. I was beginning to think it had not been poetry at all. Andrew called at noon. I was south of Grand Marais, the road cutting through a corridor of white pine, the lake visible in flashes between the trees. Hey. Dad. Just checking in. His voice was easy, conversational, the voice he used at company dinners. You getting out of the house, driving up to see an old friend of Catherine's. Someone she mentioned in the letter, not a lie. Not the truth. Good. That is good for you. Getting some air. A pause. Brief and smooth. Let me know if you need anything. He hung up without asking where. Without asking which friend. Without asking which letter or which city. I had prepared answers for each of those questions. He asked none of them. And the silence where the questions should have been sat in the car beside me like a second passenger. I drove the next 40 miles holding the wheel tighter than necessary, trying to decide which was more unsettling. A son who asked too many questions, or a son who already knew the answers. I reached Lake Keswick at 4:17 in the afternoon. The lake appeared first, visible through a gap in the tree line, flat and silver in the late light. Perfectly still. The kind of surface that gives back whatever you bring to it and reveals nothing of its own. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to 2 ruts through tall grass that suggested a path rather than insisted on one. I followed it for a 1/4 mile through birch and pine until the cabin appeared. It was smaller than I had imagined. Single story, dark wood, a covered porch that ran the length of the front face. The roof had been patched more than once. The windows were old but intact, and the wood around the frames had been maintained with the kind of attention that does not announce itself. Someone had cared for this place consistently, and without the need for anyone to notice. Thin smoke rose from the chimney, gray against the gray sky, almost invisible. The way a secret looks when it has been kept so long it has become part of the landscape. I sat in the car with the engine off, listening to the cooling metal tick. The lake was behind the cabin, visible through the trees, still holding the last of the afternoon light on its surface. Everything Catherine had said about these lakes came back to me. The stillness, the hidden layers, the distance between what you can see and what is actually there. The front door opened. A man stepped onto the porch. Late 50s, broad through the shoulders, with hands that carried the roughness of someone who worked with wood. He moved with a slight unevenness, his left leg bearing weight reluctantly, and he did not appear surprised to see a stranger's car in his driveway. He looked at me through the windshield, with the unhurried calm of a man who had been expecting this visit for a very long time. "She said you would come when the time was right," he said. "I am Oscar. Come inside." The cabin smelled like cedar and wood oil, and something faintly herbal that I could not immediately place. Oscar held the door open and stepped aside without ceremony, the way a man does when he has been expecting a guest and has long since finished preparing. Inside was smaller than it appeared from the road. A single main room served as kitchen and living space, with a wood stove in the corner radiating the kind of steady heat that comes from someone who has been feeding it all day. The furniture was handmade. I could see that immediately. The table, the 2 chairs, the bookshelf along the north wall, all built from the same pale wood with joints that were tight and precise. A craftsman's work. Not decorative. Functional in the way that only careful hands can achieve. Oscar poured coffee from a pot on the stove without asking if I wanted any. He set it in front of me and sat down across the table. His hands were large and rough, stained at the knuckles with the particular darkness that wood oil leaves when it has been absorbed over years. He did not make small talk. He did not offer condolences. He simply waited. The way a man waits, who has learned that the most important conversations begin when the other person is ready. "How long have you been here?" I asked. 12 years. Catherine found me in 2012. She paid me monthly, bank transfer, regular as a phone bill. Never missed a payment. Never asked me to do anything except maintain the cabin and stay. Stay. He said the word the same way Eleanor Voss had said the word instructions. With weight, as though the syllable itself had been carrying something for a long time and had grown dense with it. Not watch, not guard. Stay. As though his presence was the assignment. "She never told you why?" I said. "She told me enough." He looked at his coffee. "She said the day would come when someone who needed to understand would walk up that path. She said I would know him when I saw him. She said to give him this." He reached into the front pocket of his flannel shirt and produced a key. Small. Iron. Old. Heavier than its size suggested, with a simple bow and a shaft worn smooth from handling. He placed it in my palm without explanation. I looked at it. No label, no marking, just the weight of it, dense and specific. The way old iron feels when it has been forged for a single purpose and has waited a long time to fulfill it. "What does it open?" I asked. She did not tell me that part. She said you would know when you found the right place. I closed my fingers around it. The metal was warm from his pocket. I believed him. There was nothing in his manner that suggested concealment. Only the particular economy of a man who had learned to hold information without being possessive of it. I asked him then the question I had been working toward since he opened the door. Why Catherine had chosen him specifically. 12 years. A monthly arrangement. A key held in trust. Out of everyone she could have asked. Why Oscar? A carpenter on a lake in northern Minnesota. He looked down at his left leg. The way a person looks at something they have made a certain peace with, but do not enjoy explaining. His hand moved briefly to his knee, an unconscious gesture, the kind that accompanies an old injury on cold afternoons. He did not answer right away. When he looked back up, his expression had changed in a way I recognized. I had seen it on job sites when a foreman was deciding how much of a problem to disclose. The particular stillness of a man measuring the distance between what he knows and what the moment can hold. "You are an engineer," he said. "You spent your career building things that hold. Bridges, overpasses, structures designed to carry weight across empty space without failing." He paused, but there was one that did not hold. "And I think you still carry it." I had not told Oscar I was an engineer. I had not told him my name until he offered his own. I had not told him anything about my career or my life, or the 41 years I had spent reading structural reports. I stood in his cabin holding an iron key and no answer for what he had just said. Only the cold, certain feeling that the man across the table knew far more about my life than I had given anyone in northern Minnesota the chance to learn. The wood stove ticked in the silence. Outside, the lake was going dark, the surface still holding the last gray light of the evening. Catherine had said the lakes up here do not move on the surface. Everything happens underneath. I thanked Oscar for the coffee. I walked back to the cabin and stood on the porch for a long time, holding the key in my closed fist, looking at the water. Something was moving down there. I could not see it yet, but I could feel the weight of it shifting, The way you feel the first vibration in a bridge deck before the failure becomes visible. I did not sleep well. The cabin had a narrow bed in the back room that Oscar had made up with clean sheets and a wool blanket, and I lay in it, listening to the lake through the open window. Water against the dock pilings. The occasional call of a loon somewhere out in the dark. Sounds that should have been peaceful, and were not, because my mind would not stop turning over the same question. What had Catherine built in the 12 years I did not know this place existed? By 5:30, the light had come, thin and gray, the way October mornings arrive in northern Minnesota, without announcement. I dressed, splashed water on my face from the kitchen basin, and walked to the east side of the cabin. The floorboards were pine, wide plank, the kind laid in cabins throughout the North Country, but the boards along the east wall were slightly different. Same wood, same width, but the nails were newer. Someone had pulled these boards up and reset them, more than once, with the care of a person who wanted the repair to be invisible. Catherine's handwriting in her letter had said East Side. Eleanor's voice on the phone had said floorboards. The iron key Oscar had given me was heavier than any floorboard nail I had ever handled. I found the lock set into the joist beneath the third board from the wall. A small iron plate, flush with the wood, with a keyhole that matched the key exactly. I turned it. The plate released a latch and a section of floor, 3 boards wide, hinged upward on concealed hardware to reveal a space beneath. Not a crawl space, not a root cellar, a room. It was shallow, perhaps 4 feet deep, lined with moisture barrier and fitted with steel shelving on 3 sides. The air was cool and dry, controlled in a way that required engineering. A battery-powered lamp sat on the nearest shelf, fully charged. I switched it on. The light was clean and white, and it showed me everything. Catherine had built a library underground. The shelves were organized with a precision that had nothing to do with leisure. No novels, no poetry, no memoirs. Every volume I could see belonged to one of 3 categories: structural engineering reference, federal safety regulation, or forensic analysis of infrastructure failure. I pulled a book from the middle shelf. A ASHTO Bridge Design Specifications, 2004 edition. The kind of text I had referenced 1,000 times in my career. Dense, technical, written for professionals who understand that the margin between a structure that holds and a structure that kills can be measured in decimal points. Catherine had annotated it, blue ink in the margins. Small, precise handwriting. Not the relaxed script of casual reading, but the tight, focused hand of someone who was studying. She had flagged load distribution tables. She had underlined material substitution thresholds. She had circled a passage about inspection bypass protocols and written beside it in letters slightly larger than the rest. This is how they did it. I stood in the shallow underground room of a cabin in northern Minnesota, holding a bridge engineering textbook annotated by my dead wife, and felt the specific vertigo of a man discovering that someone he believed he knew completely had spent years learning his own language in secret. She had been an environmental engineer. Soil composition, water tables, contamination assessment. That was her world. Bridges were mine. And yet here were her notes in the margins of my profession. Careful and thorough and accurate in a way that told me she had not merely skimmed these texts. She had studied them. She had taught herself to read structural specifications the way I read them, not for general understanding, but for the specific ability to identify where a design had been compromised. I replaced the book and moved to the end of the shelving. A small safe sat on the lowest shelf, set against the back wall. Combination dial. Older model. Well maintained. I tried the combination without thinking. September 17th, 1978. Our wedding anniversary. It opened on the first turn. Inside, Catherine had organized the contents with the same precision as the shelves. Color-coded folders arranged by year. Tabs along the top edge, the earliest ones yellowed at the corners. And behind the folders, standing upright in a neat row, 20 envelopes. Cream-colored. Letter-sized. Each addressed in Catherine's handwriting to me at our Minneapolis address. Each one stamped. Each one sealed. 20 letters she had written, addressed, and prepared to send to me over 18 years. 20 letters she had never mailed. I sat down on the edge of the opening with my legs hanging into the space below and picked up the first envelope. The postmark date written in pencil on the corner read March 2006. Her handwriting was rounder then, less compressed. The hand of a woman who had not yet learned to write under pressure. I opened it. The first line read, James. I think something is wrong with the Millbrook Bridge project. I looked at the numbers Andrew brought home, and they don't add up. I read them in order, because Catherine had arranged them in order, and because she had spent 18 years building something sequential, and the least I could do was receive it the way she intended. The 2006 letter was 2 pages. Her handwriting round and uncertain. The hand of a woman testing a suspicion she hoped was wrong. She had found discrepancies in project reports Andrew had brought home for a family dinner. Material cost projections that did not align with the specification requirements for the Millbrook Bridge project in Hennepin County. She had not confronted anyone. She had simply written it down and sealed it in an envelope addressed to me. Maybe I am reading them wrong, she wrote. But I do not think I am. She had signed it the way she signed birthday cards. Just her name. No closing. As though she could not find a way to end a letter, she did not know how to begin. The 2009 letter was 5 pages. The handwriting was tighter. The margins had appeared. By then, she had confirmed what she suspected 3 years earlier. Andrew's company, Whitfield Infrastructure, had systematically substituted materials on the Millbrook project. Lower-grade steel, where the specification called for high tensile. Thinner reinforcement bars at wider spacing. Cost savings routed through subcontractor invoices that Catherine had traced to accounts she did not yet fully understand, but recognized as irregular. I am not going to tell you which accounts or which contracts yet, she wrote. Because if I tell you, you will go straight to Andrew and ask him directly. You have always done that. Walk toward the problem with both hands open. I love that about you. It terrifies me right now. She had known me that precisely. Known the exact reflex I would reach for, and understood why it would destroy everything she was building. The 2011 letter was dated October, 1 month after the collapse. Her handwriting had changed again. Smaller. Harder. The hand of a woman who had watched something she predicted come true, and understood that prediction is not the same as prevention. James, I know what Andrew told you about the bridge. He said it was a design flaw from the original engineering firm. He was very convincing. He has always been very convincing. But the design was not flawed. The materials were substituted. The inspection was bypassed. 6 people died on a Tuesday morning because the structure they were driving across wasn't built to the specifications that were filed with the county. 6 people. I had read about the Millbrook Bridge collapse in the newspaper like everyone else in Minneapolis. A section of overpass on the county highway system that had given way during morning traffic. Cars in the river. Emergency crews on the banks. The investigation had concluded within 8 months. Design deficiency in the original structural calculations. No evidence of contractor negligence. Andrew had come to dinner the week the report was released. He had been quiet that evening, the kind of quiet I had interpreted as the weight of professional proximity. A bridge his company had built had failed. That was not something a man carried lightly. I had poured him a second glass of wine and told him that structures fail sometimes, despite the best efforts, and that the investigation would bear out whatever the truth was. He had nodded and looked at his plate. I set down the 2011 letter and picked up 2013. 4 pages. A new name. Thomas Brennan came to you. Catherine wrote. He stood on our front porch on a Wednesday evening in November and asked to speak with you. He told you he had worked on the Millbrook project. He told you about the materials. He told you there were files in the Whitfield Regional Office in St. Paul that documented the substitutions. He asked you to help. I remembered. A cold night. Rain turning to ice on the steps. A man in a work jacket. Younger than me. Nervous. Speaking quickly. He had said things about the bridge, about concrete, about files. Andrew told you Brennan was a disgruntled former employee. Catherine continued. He showed you a personnel file with disciplinary notations. He told you Brennan had been terminated for safety violations, which was true, though he did not explain that the violations Brennan had reported were the ones Andrew wanted buried. You believed Andrew. You closed the door. I had closed the door. I remembered that too. The click of the latch. The relief of returning to the warm kitchen where Andrew sat at the table with his reasonable explanations and his steady voice and his concerned expression. Catherine had watched from the hallway. I had not known she was listening. I need you to keep reading. James. She wrote at the bottom of the page. The worst part is not what Andrew did to the bridge. It is what he did to me. I set the letter down. The lamp cast a small circle of white light around me. The rest of the room was dark. The shelves, the folders, the careful architecture of 18 years of work. All of it waiting in the shadows for me to reach it. I was not sure I was ready. I picked up the next folder anyway, because Catherine had never asked me for anything she did not believe I could carry. The folder was red. Catherine had labeled it in her precise handwriting. Millbrook Bridge, Hennepin County, 2011. I opened it on the narrow work surface she had built into the shelving and began to read the way I had read structural reports for 41 years. Slowly, methodically, letting the data establish its own sequence before I imposed any interpretation. The first section was the official record. 43 pages of incident reports, county engineering assessments, OSHA filings, and a final determination issued by the Minnesota Department of Transportation 9 months after the collapse. The conclusion was stated in the measured language of institutional authority. Structural failure attributable to design deficiency in the original load calculations, compounded by material fatigue consistent with the service age of the structure. Catherine had read every page. Her blue ink filled the margins. She had circled the date of the pre-construction material certification, January 2008, and drawn a line to the corresponding specification sheet filed with the county, which listed high tensile steel reinforcement at load-bearing intervals of 4 feet. She had written beside it, filed spec. Then beneath it, in a different ink, added later, actual spec substituted. See subcontractor invoice. March 2008. The subcontractor invoice was in the next section. It documented a bulk order of standard grade reinforcement bar, 40% below the cost of the high tensile steel specified in the county filing. The order had been approved by Whitfield Infrastructure's Project Management Office. Catherine had highlighted the approval signature and written one word beside it. Andrew. I turned to the second half of the folder. Catherine had commissioned an independent analysis. A forensic engineering firm based in Chicago, retained privately, paid from an account I had never known existed. Their report was 22 pages. I read it twice. The conclusion, written in the careful language of experts who understand that precision is their only protection, stated that the substitution of standard grade reinforcement for the specified high tensile steel, combined with the absence of a supplemental load test that would have been standard practice for the modified materials, constituted a material deviation from accepted structural engineering practice and was, in their professional assessment, the proximate cause of the collapse, not a design flaw, a decision. Someone had read the specification. Someone had calculated the savings. Someone had signed the invoice. And someone had filed a materials certification with the county that described steel that was never installed. I sat back and looked at the wall of the underground room. 6 people. A Tuesday morning. Cars on a bridge that was carrying weight it was never built to hold. Then I found the letter dated 2014. It was clipped to the inside cover of the folder, separate from the 20 envelopes in the safe. Shorter than the others. Catherine's handwriting was different here. Not the round, uncertain script of 2006 or the tight, compressed hand of 2011. This was controlled, deliberate. The hand of a woman who had moved past anger into something harder and more durable. James, there is something I need you to understand about the document you signed at our kitchen table on Thanksgiving 2008. Andrew told you it was a peer review formality, a family courtesy. He smiled when he handed you the pen, and you signed it between the dessert plates because you trusted him, and because fathers trust their sons. It was not a peer review. It was a safety certification, an independent engineer's verification that the materials and construction methods used on the Millbrook Bridge project met or exceeded all applicable federal and state specifications. Your signature, your professional credentials, your 40 years of experience. All of it was used to satisfy the county's requirement for third-party structural validation. Without your signature, the project would have been subject to a full independent inspection. With it, the inspection was waived. You did not know. Andrew made certain you would not know. He presented it at a family dinner, in a family context, with the language of family obligation, because he understood that you would not read a document your son described as routine. He was correct. I am telling you this not to cause you pain, but because you need to understand the full architecture of what happened. Your name is on the document that cleared the bridge for construction. That fact cannot be undone, but it can be placed in context. And the context is that you were deceived by the person you had the least reason to suspect. I set the letter on the work surface and placed both hands flat on either side of it. The room was very quiet. The lamp hummed. The air system Catherine had installed moved cool, steady air across the shelves and the folders, and the 20 years of work arranged around me like the interior of a mind I had never been permitted to enter. I remembered the Thanksgiving table, the wine, the dessert plates, Andrew's smile, the pen in my hand, and across from me, Catherine, her teacup raised, her hand pausing for one fraction of a second, watching me sign a document that would clear a bridge for construction and seal 6 deaths into the record as an accident. She had known. She had watched. And she had said nothing, because if she had spoken in that moment, Andrew would have understood that she was watching, and 18 years of work would have collapsed before it began. She had let me sign. She had carried that silence for 16 years. And then she had written it down in a letter she placed inside the evidence, because she wanted me to find the truth in the right order and in the right context, which was the context of a woman who loved me enough to let me be wrong so that she could eventually make it right. At the bottom of the letter, in slightly larger handwriting, there is more. James. When I got too close, Andrew found a way to make sure no one would believe me. Read the medical file. Then you will understand everything. The medical file was in a separate section of the safe, pressed flat against the back wall as though Catherine had wanted it found last. 2 folders. The first labeled in blue ink medical records, official version. The second in red medical records. Truth. I opened the official version first. 2 years of documentation on meridian neurology, associate's letterhead, consultation notes, cognitive assessments, imaging referrals, treatment recommendations, all signed by Dr. Carl Reinhardt, board-certified neurology, Minneapolis. The file began in the spring of 2022 and ran through a final entry dated 6 weeks before Catherine died. I am not a physician. I am an engineer. But I have spent 4 decades determining whether numbers on a page reflect reality or whether someone has arranged them to tell a story the data does not support. A real structural report has variation. Load tests fluctuate. Material samples cluster around the specification, but never sit precisely on it. Because the physical world does not produce perfect numbers. Only fabricated data looks perfect. Catherine's cognitive scores declined at a steady, symmetrical rate. Every interval tracked the textbook progression of early-stage Alzheimer's with the consistency of a classroom example. No anomalies, no unexpected fluctuations. 2 years of data with the variance of a controlled simulation. No real patient's chart looks like this. I had seen enough falsified engineering reports to recognize manufactured data. Someone had built these numbers to tell a predetermined story. I searched for Dr. Reinhardt on my phone. The Minnesota Medical Board had suspended his license in 2020 for falsification of patient records. He paid a fine, completed remediation, and was reinstated in 21 with conditions. Andrew introduced him to us in the spring of 22. I placed the official folder face down and opened the second. Catherine's handwriting filled the first page, larger and more deliberate than her letters. The hand of a person writing for the permanent record. James, I was never diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. The diagnosis was fabricated by Reinhardt at Andrew's direction. Andrew believed this would accomplish two things. It would isolate me from credibility, because a woman with cognitive decline cannot be a reliable witness. And it would allow him to control my movements and restrict my access to our financial records without arousing suspicion. He underestimated how much I had already completed. She had not been at the care facility in Rochester. During the 18 months, Andrew told me she was receiving specialized cognitive therapy. She had been here, in this cabin, in this room. Using the time Andrew believed she was under supervised care to finish the documentation I had been reading. She returned to Minneapolis every 3 weeks for visits lasting 3 or 4 days. During those visits, she allowed herself to appear diminished, speaking slowly, pausing before answers, letting her hand tremble when she lifted her teacup. She performed the diagnosis Andrew had purchased for her with the precision of a woman who understood that the only way to protect her work was to become the person her son had decided she was. It had not required much acting. She had been carrying something difficult for 18 years. The exhaustion was real. Only the cause was different. The final page was a single sheet, the handwriting larger, as though she wanted to make sure I could read it in low light without my glasses. James, I am sorry for the way I did this. Not for doing it, only for the way. I did not expect my heart to give out before I could tell you myself. I wanted to sit across from you at our kitchen table and explain everything in person. I wanted to see your face when you understood. I am sorry I will not get to do that. Not the secret, the silence. That is what I'm most sorry for. I set the page down. The lamp hummed. The air system moved its steady current across the shelves. 18 years of Catherine's work surrounded me, built in silence, carried alone, hidden beneath the floorboards of a cabin while her husband sat in Minneapolis believing she was losing her mind in Rochester. She had come home every 3 weeks and pretended to be disappearing. I had held her hand and spoken gently and slowed my speech and done all the things a loving husband does when his wife is fading. She had let me because the alternative was telling me the truth, and the truth would have ended everything she had built. I am an engineer. 41 years of reading bad news and keeping my composure because the work required it. That night, in the room my wife had built beneath the floor, I put my face in my hands and wept. I allowed myself exactly the time it took. Then I folded the page, replaced both folders in the safe, and closed the door. I sat in the dark, listening to the lake through the cabin walls. The same sound Catherine had listened to for 12 years while she worked alone, carrying what I had refused to carry. Then the knocking came. 3 slow strikes against the front door. Not urgent, not hesitant. The knock of a man accustomed to being admitted. "Dad." Andrew's voice. Calm through the old wood. "I know you are here. Your car is out front." I closed the safe. I replaced the floorboards. I pressed each one down until the nails seated flush, and the surface looked the way it had looked before I opened it. Undisturbed. Ordinary. A cabin floor and nothing more. Then I washed my face in the kitchen basin with cold water, dried it on the towel hanging beside the stove, and looked at myself in the small mirror above the sink. The man looking back was 73 years old, and had been crying, and had not slept, and had just learned that his dead wife had spent 18 years building a case against his son in a room hidden beneath the floor he was standing on. That man needed to disappear for the next hour. In his place, I assembled someone else, a tired father, a grieving widower, a man who had driven a long way to sort through an old property and was mildly surprised and genuinely glad to see his son. I opened the door. Andrew stood on the porch in a charcoal jacket, a leather travel bag at his feet. He looked exactly as he always did. Composed. Well-dressed. The kind of man who entered a room as though it had been waiting for him. He smiled when he saw me, and the smile was warm, and I knew every frequency of it. "Dad." He stepped forward and embraced me. Brief and calibrated. The correct pressure. The correct duration. You had me worried. "I have been calling. I needed quiet." I said. "You know how I get after long drives." He nodded, as if that explained everything. Then he told me how he had found the address. "A letter in Catherine's home office," he said. "Something he came across while organizing her papers." His voice carried the smooth regret of a man performing a difficult kindness. I listened and said nothing that disagreed. Inside. His eyes moved through the cabin with the careful attention of a man taking inventory, without wanting to appear to do so. The kitchen counter, the bookshelf, the hallway to the back room, the wood stove. His gaze traveled the space systematically, and I watched it the way I used to watch a load test gauge, waiting for the reading that did not belong. He did not look toward the east wall. Not once. In a single-room cabin where every surface was visible from the front door, he managed to examine every section of the floor except the one that mattered. He was trying not to look at the thing he had come for, which told me he knew it was here, but did not know exactly where. We sat in the 2 chairs by the wood stove. Andrew leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, the posture of a man being frank. "I have spoken with a development group," he said, "out of Minneapolis. They specialize in lakefront properties. Conservation-oriented. Sustainable development. They are prepared to make a serious offer for this parcel. Fair market value. Possibly above. I can have their people here within the week." He placed a folder on the small table between us. Inside was a purchase agreement. Cabin and associated parcel. Lake Keswick, Cook County. Buyer listed as North Shore Heritage. Partners LLC. Consideration $750,000. The amount was significantly above what any reasonable appraisal would assign to a 1-room cabin on an unpaved road. That told me the value was not in the cabin. "That is a strong offer," I said. "They move fast when they see potential." His voice was easy, confident, and this property has a very specific appeal for their portfolio. What is their actual interest in the land? I asked. Not the cabin. The land. A pause. Small. Controlled. The kind of pause that would be invisible to someone who was not specifically listening for it. Long-term conservation easement, he said. The whole lake corridor is undervalued. They are assembling adjacent parcels as part of a regional strategy. Adjacent parcels, I said. How many? I am not certain of the exact number. I let the silence sit between us. He held it well. He had been holding silences his entire career, but his jaw had tightened by 1 degree. The way a jaw tightens when a man recalculates what the person across from him might know. I told him I would think about it. I told him I was tired and needed sleep. I gave him the name of a motel in Grand Marais that Eleanor had mentioned. He accepted this without pushing. Another tell. A man confident enough to wait was a man who believed he still controlled the timeline. At the door, he turned back. Do not sign anything without talking to me first, he said. It was shaped like advice. It was not advice. Of course, I said. I watched his rental car back down the dirt track and disappear into the birch. Then I went inside and stood in the cabin in the dark. My hands were steady. 41 years of maintaining composure under structural load leaves a residue, a capacity for stillness that has nothing to do with peace. I pulled up the floorboards again and went back down into the room Catherine had built. There was one envelope I had not yet opened. Brown, sealed with a strip of red tape. The label in Catherine's handwriting read, 2007. Read this after you understand the bridge file. The red tape came away cleanly. Catherine had sealed it with the particular care of someone who wanted the opening to feel intentional, a threshold rather than a tear. Inside were 3 sets of documents, each clipped separately, each ordered in the sequence she wanted me to read them. The first was a subcontractor agreement, dated March 2007. Whitfield Infrastructure as the contracting party. A materials supplier based in Duluth as the vendor. The order specified standard-grade reinforcement bar in quantities consistent with a major bridge project. The unit cost was 40% below the price of the high-tensile steel listed in the county specification filing. Beside the cost column, Catherine had written in blue ink, "This is the substitution." The document that proves what they actually purchased versus what they claimed to install. The second set was an insurance file, a policy covering the Millbrook Bridge project, underwritten by a company I had never heard of. Great Lakes Mutual Indemnity, registered in Delaware. Catherine had attached a corporate registry printout showing that Great Lakes Mutual was a subsidiary of a holding company called Lakeshore Capital Partners, also registered in Delaware. Lakeshore Capital's registered agent was a service firm in Wilmington. Its sole officer was listed as A. Whitfield. Andrew had insured his own project through a company he controlled. The premiums paid by Whitfield Infrastructure flowed to Great Lakes Mutual, which flowed to Lakeshore Capital, which flowed back to Andrew. A closed loop. Money moving in a circle, generating the appearance of independent coverage while remaining entirely within his control. Catherine had built the diagram herself. On the back page of the insurance file, She had drawn a chain of ownership in blue ink, each entity connected by arrows, each arrow annotated with registration dates and filing numbers. The diagram grew denser toward the center, the handwriting smaller, the connections tighter. The way complex systems contract as you approach their core. At the center, she had written Lakeshore Capital, Partners, LLC, third-tier subsidiary of Whitfield Infrastructure, beneficial owner, Andrew James Whitfield. Below the insurance materials was the third set, a cadastral map, a land survey document covering a 10-mile radius around Lake Keswick, printed on large format paper and folded into quarters. Catherine had unfolded and refolded it so many times, the crease lines had gone soft. She had been studying this map for years. Every parcel within a mile of the cabin's boundary was outlined in blue ink. In the margin beside each parcel, a company name, a purchase date, a filing number, 11 parcels, 6 years of transactions, 11 different company names. I recognized none of them, which was the point. Catherine had traced each one. A small index card clipped to the inside cover for every company. Name, Delaware registration number, registered agent, date of incorporation. I pulled the first card. Boundary Conservation Holdings, LLC, registered March 2018. Agent listed as a service company in Wilmington. No website. No physical address. No officers beyond the statutory minimum. The second card was a different name with the same structure. By the fifth card, I understood. 8 shell companies. All registered in Delaware. All traced back through Catherine's hand-drawn diagram to a single entity. Lakeshore Capital Partners. Andrew. He had been circling this property for 6 years. Quietly. Systematically. Through layers of corporate architecture designed to make the pattern invisible to anyone who was not specifically searching for it. The cabin sat at the center of the outlined parcels like a gap in a completed puzzle. The one piece not yet acquired, on the back of the map, in red ink. Catherine had written, "Why does Andrew need this land at any cost?" Because the original insurance fraud payout was routed through a shell company registered to this address. The cabin is the paper trail. If he owns the cabin, he can destroy the records that connect Great Lakes Mutual to Lakeshore Capital to Whitfield Infrastructure. If I own the cabin, the records survive. She had not hidden here for 12 years because the cabin was safe. She had hidden here because the cabin was evidence. Below the map notation, in smaller handwriting, a line from her 2020 letter. I am nearly finished. One more piece. I need someone inside. I think I know who. I set the map down and looked out the window. The lake was dark. No light on its surface. No movement visible. But I knew now what Catherine had always known. Everything happens underneath. I thought about Oscar. 12 years in a cottage by the lake. A man with a damaged left leg and a careful way of speaking and the patient stillness of someone who'd been asked to wait and had decided the waiting was worth it. A man who had asked me about a structure that did not hold and had watched my face when I failed to answer. Catherine had not chosen him because he was a good carpenter. She had chosen him because he already knew what Andrew was capable of. Because he had a reason of his own to stay. I did not yet know what that reason was. But standing in the underground room with the map in my hands, and the lake outside the window. I understood that I was about to find out. I found Oscar at the edge of the lake. He was sitting on an overturned canoe with a mug of coffee balanced on his knee, watching the water the way a man watches something he has been watching for a long time, without expecting it to change. The morning mist was still on the surface, thin and low, moving in slow currents that had nothing to do with wind. He looked up when he heard me on the path. No surprise, no adjustment. Just the steady acknowledgement of a man who had known this conversation was coming and had already decided not to waste time getting to it. "The bridge that fell," I said. "Who was she to you?" Oscar looked at the lake for a moment, not avoiding the question, finishing a thought. Then he set the coffee down on the hull of the canoe and told me. Her name was Lily. Lily Gaines. She was 19 years old. First year at the University of Minnesota. She was driving across the Millbrook Bridge on a Tuesday morning in September because she had an 8 o'clock class, and the bridge was the fastest route from the apartment she shared with 2 other girls on the south side of the river. When the section gave way, her car went into the water. She did not get out. He said it plainly, without drama, the way a man says something he has said before in his own mind. Enough times that the words have worn smooth and lost their edges, but not their weight. Oscar had been a carpenter, not the kind who builds furniture in a lakeside cabin, though he had become that man since. The kind who builds forms for concrete, pours on commercial job sites. He had worked for a subcontractor on the Millbrook project for 7 months in 2008 and 9, long enough to hold the reinforcement bars in his hands, long enough to know the difference between what the specification called for and what was delivered to the site. He had submitted a written objection to the site foreman in July of 2009. Standard grade steel, where the spec required high tensile, wider spacing between supports than the engineering drawings authorized. He had put it in writing because he had learned that verbal complaints disappear and written ones do not. He was terminated the following week. Personnel restructuring, the letter said. 2 months later, the bridge collapsed. Oscar paused. The mist on the lake had begun to thin. Through it, I could see the far shore. Dark pines reflected in water so still it looked like glass. Thomas Brennan worked the same crew, he said. We filed the objection together. Tom was the one who went to your house afterward. He said he was going to talk to the engineer, the one whose name was on the certification. I told him it would not do any good. He went anyway. I stood at the edge of the lake, holding what Oscar had just given me, and feeling the specific weight of a man learning that the door he closed on a rainy November evening had been opened by someone who had lost a daughter. Brennan came to my house. I said, I remember. I know. Oscar's voice did not change. Catherine told me. She told me you believed Andrew. She said you were not the first person he had convinced, and that being angry at you would not help Lily. He picked up his coffee and took a slow drink. The gesture of a man returning to a rhythm he had maintained through 12 years of waiting. In 2012. Catherine came to find me, he said. She had already been working for 6 years by then. She had the contracts. She had the insurance records. She knew about the shell companies. She knew about the land purchases. She knew more about your son's operation than anyone alive. And she came to a carpenter's house in northern Minnesota and sat at my table and said, "Oscar, I need you to stay here and wait. We are going to do this the right way, and I want you to be part of it when the time comes." "Why you?" I asked, out of everyone she could have found. "Because I was already here," he said simply. "Because I had moved up to the lake after Lily died, because I could not stay in the city where it happened. And because Catherine understood that a man who has lost a child to something that should not have happened does not stop wanting it to be answered. He just learns to wait." He looked at me. "There is one more person you need to meet," he said. "Catherine arranged it last year. She will come to you when she is ready." "Who?" I said. Oscar did not answer directly. He looked past me toward the cabin, toward the path that led around the south side of the building to the small gate in the fence that I had not yet used. "You will know her," he said. "You have known her for a long time. You just have not seen her clearly, and that is not your fault. She has not been permitted to be seen." The mist had lifted. The lake was open now, flat and silver, the surface holding the morning light the way it held everything. Calmly, without disclosure, I stood at its edge beside a man who had lost his daughter on a bridge my son had built, and my signature had cleared. And I understood that the water beneath us had been moving for a very long time. She arrived on the third morning. I was sitting on the porch with Oscar's black coffee cooling between my hands, watching the mist lift off Lake Keswick in slow, vertical threads, when a dark blue sedan pulled onto the gravel path. It was not a car I recognized. The engine cut. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out carrying a canvas bag over her right shoulder. She was younger than I expected. Mid-40s. Maybe. Brown hair pulled back. No jewelry except a thin silver band on her left hand. She walked toward the cabin with the careful posture of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times, but never believed it would actually come. Oscar stood up from his chair. He did not seem surprised. "James," he said quietly. "This is Rachel." I knew the name. Andrew's wife. I had seen her at holidays, at birthday dinners, at the occasional Sunday visit when Andrew still pretended those mattered. She always sat slightly apart from him. She laughed when expected. She spoke when addressed. In 46 years of engineering, I had learned to read load patterns, the way stress distributes through a structure before failure. Rachel carried her weight the way a beam carries beyond its rating, quietly, invisibly, until it doesn't. "Mr. Whitfield," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "Catherine told me you would be here by now." I set the coffee down. "You spoke with Catherine for 8 years." She paused. "She contacted me in 2016. I didn't know why at first. She said she needed someone inside Andrew's house. Someone who could see what he did when no one was watching." Rachel looked at Oscar, then back at me. I didn't understand what she meant until 2018. We moved inside. Oscar closed the door and stood near the window, watching the road. Rachel sat across the kitchen table from me and placed the canvas bag between us. She unzipped it and removed a small black hard drive, a USB stick, and a manila folder held together with a rubber band. 2 years of recordings, she said. Audio only. I used a device Catherine gave me. It looked like a phone charger. I kept it plugged into the kitchen outlet behind the toaster. She touched the hard drive. Every conversation Andrew had in that kitchen from January 2022 to December 2023. Business calls, instructions to his accountant, 3 calls to a man he referred to only as the fixer. I stared at the hard drive. 2 years. 730 days of a woman pretending everything was normal, while a small device recorded the truth 6 feet away from her husband. "Why did you stay?" I asked. Rachel's jaw tightened. She looked at the table. "Because Catherine asked me to, and because I have 2 children who are 9 and 11. And Andrew made it very clear what would happen to my custody if I ever tried to leave." She opened the manila folder. Inside were printed bank statements, highlighted in yellow. Wire transfers from Lakeshore Capital Partners to 3 separate accounts in the Cayman Islands. The amounts were consistent. $42,000. Monthly. For 31 months. The total, if my arithmetic was correct, exceeded $1.3 million. "He told me it was investment income," Rachel said. "I believed him for the first 4 years. Then Catherine showed me the shell company map, the same map you found downstairs. I thought about that. Catherine had recruited Oscar for his grief and his knowledge of the bridge. She had recruited Eleanor Voss for legal architecture. She had recruited Rachel for proximity. Each person chosen not randomly, but precisely. The way an engineer selects materials for specific load conditions. Catherine had built a structure of her own, not from steel and concrete, but from people. And every joint was intentional. "There is something else," Rachel said. She pulled a single sheet of paper from the bottom of the folder. It was a printout of an email dated November 14th, 2023. From Andrew to Dr. Carl Reinhardt. The subject line read, "Phase 2 Father." I read it twice. The email discussed a preliminary cognitive assessment. It referenced my age, my recent forgetfulness, my tendency to repeat stories at dinner. Andrew was asking Reinhardt whether the same protocol used on Catherine could be adapted for a 73-year-old male subject. The kitchen went very quiet. "He was going to do it to you," Rachel said. "The same thing. The diagnosis, the isolation, the financial control. Catherine found this email 3 weeks before she died. That is why she moved the timeline forward. That is why Eleanor called you when she did." I set the paper down. My hands were steady, which surprised me. 46 years of reading structural reports had taught me that the most dangerous failures are the ones that look stable on the surface. A bridge can carry traffic for a decade with a fractured girder if the load path finds an alternative route. But the fracture is still there, growing, waiting. Andrew had been planning to erase me the same way he erased Catherine. Oscar turned from the window. "Someone's coming up the county road. Silver truck. Could be nothing." Rachel zipped the canvas bag and pushed it toward me. "Everything is on the drive. Every conversation. Every transfer. Catherine said you would know what to do with it." I picked up the bag. It weighed almost nothing. But I understood now that the lightest evidence often carries the heaviest consequences. "We need to leave," I said. "Not tomorrow. Tonight." Oscar nodded. Rachel stood. And for the first time in 5 days, I was not thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what Catherine had built. We did not leave that night. At 11:15, the silver truck passed the cabin without stopping. Oscar watched its taillights disappear beyond the tree line and said nothing for a long time. Rachel sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded, the canvas bag at her feet. I stood by the east window, looking at the dark water. The lake reflected nothing. No moon, no stars. Just black glass stretching to the far shore. "He'll come back," Oscar said. "Not the truck. Andrew." He was right. Andrew arrived the next morning at 9:42. I know the exact time because I looked at Catherine's old kitchen clock when I heard the engine. It was the same black SUV from 2 days before. Same gravel crunch. Same deliberate pause before the door opened. Andrew stepped out wearing a gray wool coat and carrying a leather folder under his left arm. He looked rested. He looked like a man arriving for a business meeting. Rachel was already in the back bedroom. Oscar was outside near the woodpile, splitting logs with a rhythm that could pass for routine. I opened the front door before Andrew reached the porch. "Dad," he smiled. "You look tired. Come in," I said. He sat at the kitchen table in the same chair Rachel had used the night before. He placed the leather folder on the surface and aligned it with the table edge, the way he always arranged documents. Precise. Controlled. I had once admired that quality. Now I understood it differently. Precision in the wrong hands is not discipline. It is concealment. "I brought something for you to look at," Andrew said. He opened the folder and slid a single document across the table. It was a purchase agreement for the cabin and surrounding property. The buyer was listed as Lakeshore Capital Partners. The offered price was $420,000. "The property is worth more than that," I said. "The property is a liability. Dad, remote location, deferred maintenance, no rental income. I'm offering above market as a courtesy." He paused. "You shouldn't be up here alone. It's not good for someone your age." Someone your age. I heard Catherine's voice in those words. Or rather, I heard what Catherine had warned me about. The careful framing. The slow reduction of a person into a problem to be managed. I did not pick up the document. Instead, I sat down across from him and placed my hands flat on the table. "I found the floor," I said. Andrew's expression did not change, but his right index finger, resting on the leather folder, pressed down slightly. 1 millimeter, maybe 2. In bridge inspection, we called that a micro-deflection, invisible to the untrained eye. Diagnostic to anyone who knows where to look. "I don't know what that means," he said. "The east side floorboards, the safe, the 20 letters, the red folder." I kept my voice level. I had spent 3 days reading Catherine's evidence. I had spent 46 years reading structures. Both disciplines teach the same lesson. Emotion obscures data. I know about the Millbrook Bridge material substitution. I know about the 8 shell companies registered in Delaware. I know about the 11 parcels acquired through Lakeshore Capital around this lake. I know about Thomas Brennan's objection and his termination. Andrew leaned back. His jaw shifted to the left, a habit from childhood that meant he was calculating, not feeling. Catherine was confused at the end. You know that. The diagnosis was fabricated. I did not raise my voice. "Doctor, Carl Reinhardt falsified cognitive assessments on your instructions. He was suspended by the Minnesota Medical Board in 2020 for the same pattern of conduct. Catherine was never sick. Andrew. She was working. The kitchen was silent. The clock ticked. I could hear Oscar's axe outside, steady and rhythmic. A man who understood the value of staying close. I know about the insurance loop," I continued. "Great Lakes mutual underwriting policies for projects owned by subsidiaries of the same holding company. I know about the monthly wire transfers to 3 Cayman accounts. $42,000. 31 months. Totaling over $1.3 million. Andrew's eyes moved to the east wall. Just for a moment. Then back to me. "And I know what you signed me on to in 2008. I said. "The document you handed me at Thanksgiving. It was not a peer review. It was a safety certification that waived independent inspection of the Millbrook Bridge. 6 people died 2 months later. I carry that. I will always carry that. But I didn't know what I was signing. You did. Andrew stood up slowly. He buttoned his coat. He picked up the purchase agreement and returned it to the leather folder. His movements were careful, economical, rehearsed. A man packing up a failed negotiation. You don't understand the full picture, he said. I understand the full picture for the first time in 17 years. He walked to the door. His hand rested on the frame. He did not turn around. You're making a mistake, Dad. No, I said. I made a mistake in 2008. What I am doing now is a correction. Andrew stepped onto the porch. He paused for exactly 3 seconds, looking toward the lake. Then he pulled his phone from his coat pocket and made a call. Lasted 40 seconds. I could not hear the words, but I recognized the tone. Low. Urgent. Directive. He got into the SUV and drove south without looking back. Oscar set down the axe and walked to the porch. He stood beside me, watching the dust settle on the gravel road. How long do we have? He asked. I looked at Catherine's clock through the open door. 9:58. Not long, I said. Get Rachel. We leave in 20 minutes. We were on the highway by 10:22. Oscar drove. His truck was a faded green Ford with 200,000 miles on the odometer and a crack running diagonally across the windshield like a river on a map. Rachel sat in the back seat with the canvas bag on her lap, both arms wrapped around it the way a person holds something that cannot be replaced. I sat in the passenger seat with Catherine's manila folder and the 20 letters in a plastic bin between my feet. The iron key was in my coat pocket. I could feel its weight against my chest with every breath. No one spoke for the first 40 minutes. I watched the Minnesota landscape pass. Birch trees thinning into open farmland. Grain elevators standing alone against a pale sky. The road was straight and flat and empty. The kind of road that makes you believe you can see everything ahead. But I had spent 46 years building structures on ground that looked solid and was not. Surface conditions are unreliable. Every engineer learns this. The ones who forget it build things that fall. Oscar broke the silence near Hinckley. Andrew has people in Duluth, he said. A property manager, an accountant. If he made that call to either of them, they'll know which direction we're heading. Then we don't stop in Duluth, I said. We're not going to Duluth. Oscar adjusted the rearview mirror. I'm taking Highway 61 south to the Twin Cities. There's a federal building on Washington Avenue in Minneapolis. Catherine wrote the address on a card she gave me in 2019. She said if the day ever came, I should drive straight there and ask for one person. Who I asked? Special Agent Sarah Lindstrom, Fraud and Public Corruption Division. I looked at Oscar. His jaw was set. Both hands steady on the wheel despite the leg that troubled him. He had carried this name for 7 years without using it. 7 years of splitting wood and watching the lake and waiting for a man he had never met to find a floor he did not know existed. That is patience of a kind I do not fully understand. Engineers calculate load duration. We measure how long a material can sustain stress before failure. Oscar had sustained his for over a decade and had not failed. Rachel leaned forward from the back seat. Catherine gave me a number, too. She said it was Lindstrom's direct line, not the switchboard. I was supposed to call it only if something went wrong before we could get there in person. Call it now, I said. Rachel dialed. The phone rang 4 times. A woman answered with a voice that was neither warm nor cold. Professional. Controlled. This is Rachel Whitfield. Catherine Whitfield gave me this number. My father-in-law, James Whitfield, is with me. We have documents, recordings, and financial records related to Whitfield infrastructure and the Millbrook Bridge collapse. We are driving to Minneapolis now, and will arrive by early afternoon. A pause. Then Agent Lindstrom asked 3 questions. How many years of recordings? How many financial accounts documented? Whether Andrew Whitfield was aware we had the material. Rachel answered. 2 years. 3 Cayman accounts plus 8 domestic shells. And yes, he knew. Lindstrom said one sentence. Come directly to the federal building. Do not stop. Do not go home. I will have a team ready. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. Oscar accelerated past a logging truck. The highway opened ahead of us, straight and southbound. I thought about Catherine sitting in that cabin year after year, building her case the way I once built bridges, calculating spans, testing joints, ensuring every connection could bear the weight it would eventually be asked to carry. She had chosen each person for a specific function. Eleanor Voss for the legal framework, Oscar for loyalty and first-hand knowledge, Rachel for proximity and courage, Agent Lindstrom for authority, and me. She had chosen me last. Not because I was least important, but because I was the one who needed to see everything before I could act. She knew that about me. After 46 years, she knew that I do not move until I understand the full structure. She gave me the letters, the folders, the safe, the floor, one layer at a time, because she understood that I would read them the way I read blueprints, sequentially, completely, without skipping a page. We crossed into the Twin Cities at 1:37 in the afternoon. The skyline rose from the plains like a diagram, steel and glass catching pale winter light. Oscar took the Washington Avenue exit and parked in the Federal Building's visitor lot at 1:51. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment, both hands still on the wheel. 12 years, he said quietly. She asked me to wait 12 years. I put my hand on his shoulder. I am not a man who touches others easily. 46 years of engineering teaches you to keep your hands clean and your margins precise. But some moments require a different kind of measurement. You held, I said. Oscar nodded once. Then he opened the door. Rachel carried the canvas bag. I carried the bin of letters and the manila folder. Oscar walked ahead, his left leg pulling slightly with each step, steady and unhurried. We entered the building at 1:54, showed identification, and were escorted to the 7th floor. Agent Sarah Lindstrom was already standing when we entered the conference room. She was perhaps 50, tall, with reading glasses pushed up onto her head and a legal pad already open on the table. She looked at the 3 of us the way I once looked at a set of plans before beginning review. Sit down, she said. Start from the beginning. And so we did. At 9:47 that evening, Andrew Whitfield was arrested at the Marquette Hotel in downtown Minneapolis. The trial began on a Monday in January. Federal Courthouse, District of Minnesota. 3rd floor. Courtroom 6. I had walked past that building 1,000 times during my career without ever stepping inside. Engineers build the structures that hold courtrooms. We do not usually sit in them. But on that morning, I sat in the 2nd row behind the prosecution table, with Oscar on my left and Rachel on my right. And I listened as 17 counts were read aloud against my son. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, involuntary manslaughter. 6 counts, obstruction of justice, falsification of federal safety records, money laundering through foreign financial institutions. Each charge was read in a flat, measured voice by a clerk who had no personal connection to any of it. That is how the law works. It removes emotion from fact. Engineers do the same thing. We do not ask whether a fracture is sad. We ask whether it is structural. The trial lasted 11 days. I attended every session. Agent Lindstrom's team had built their case the way Catherine would have appreciated. Methodical. Layered. Every document authenticated. Every recording transcribed. Every financial trail mapped back to its origin with the precision of a cadastral survey. The prosecution called 14 witnesses. Thomas Brennan, the whistleblower Andrew had discredited in 2009, testified for 3 hours. He spoke quietly, without anger, about the written objection he and Oscar had filed and the termination that followed. When asked why he had not pursued the matter further at the time, he said, "Because I was told by people I trusted that I was wrong, and I believed them. I understood that testimony more than I wanted to." Dr. Carl Reinhardt took the stand on day 7. He confirmed, under immunity agreement, that Andrew had commissioned the fabricated cognitive assessments for Catherine beginning in 2017. He described the protocol: quarterly reports with incrementally declining scores, designed to simulate progressive neurodegeneration, a paper trail indistinguishable from genuine Alzheimer's documentation unless you knew to compare it against independent neurological baselines, which Andrew ensured were never ordered. When the defense attorney asked Reinhardt why he had agreed to participate, he said, "Mr. Whitfield made it clear that my practice depended on his cooperation." Reinhardt's medical license was permanently revoked the following month. Rachel testified on day 9. She described 8 years of financial control, the recordings she made, and the email she had found on Andrew's laptop in November 2023. The one with the subject line, "Phase 2 Father." The courtroom was quiet when she read it aloud. I kept my hands flat on my knees and my breathing even. An engineer does not react to data. He records it. Oscar testified on day 10. He did not speak about shell companies or wire transfers. He spoke about Lily. He described driving her to the university campus on her first day in September 2008. He described the backpack she carried, green with a broken zipper she refused to replace because she said it gave it character. He described the phone call he received 11 days later from a state trooper who asked him to come to Hennepin County Medical Center. He described the hallway, the light, the door. He did not describe what was behind the door. He did not need to. On the 11th day, the jury returned a verdict in 4 hours. Guilty on all 17 counts. Sentencing followed 6 weeks later. 28 years. Federal facility. No parole eligibility for 22. Andrew stood when the sentence was read. He did not look at me. He looked straight ahead at the judge, the same way he had looked at the lake from my porch. Fixed. Calculating. Even at the end. Measuring angles. I did not feel relief. I did not feel victory. I felt the specific gravity of completion. The same sensation I experienced every time a bridge I designed was load tested for the first time. and the instruments confirmed what the mathematics had predicted. Not joy. Confirmation. After the trial, I drove north one last time. Alone. It was March. The ice on Lake Keswick was beginning to thin at the edges. Dark water showing through in crescents near the shore. I unlocked the cabin, walked to the east side room, and sat in Catherine's chair beneath the battery-powered lamp. The shelves were mostly empty now. The FBI had cataloged and removed the evidence months before. But one item remained on the bottom shelf, sealed in a cardboard tube I had not opened during my first visit. Oscar had told me about it the night before the trial. He said Catherine had placed it there last, in 2023, and asked him not to mention it until everything was finished. I opened the tube and unrolled a single sheet of drafting paper, 36 by 24 inches, standard engineering size. It was a bridge design, Catherine's bridge, drawn in her careful hand, every line precise, every annotation legible. She had designed a replacement for the Millbrook crossing, not a copy of the original, a new structure entirely. Cable stayed, single pylon, with a pedestrian walkway on the east side and a small observation platform at the midpoint overlooking the river valley. The material specifications were correct. The load calculations were sound. I checked them twice. She had learned enough in 17 years of studying my textbooks to produce a design that any licensed engineer would approve. At the bottom of the sheet, in small letters, she had written one line, "For the 6 who crossed and didn't arrive." And for the one who builds things that hold. I rolled the paper carefully and placed it back in the tube. I turned off the lamp. I climbed the stairs and closed the floorboard and walked out onto the porch. The lake was still. Not empty still. Full still. The kind of stillness that holds everything beneath it, without letting any of it rise to the surface until the moment is right. Catherine had waited 17 years. I sat on the porch and watched the dark water until the sun went down. Then I went inside, made a pot of coffee in her old kettle, and began to write a letter to the Hennepin County Transportation Authority, requesting a formal review of the Millbrook Bridge replacement project. I included Catherine's drawing. Some structures take a long time to build. The ones that matter usually do.